Emma is just 11 years old. You can't imagine what she's had to endure. The moment she witnessed her mother's betrayal, her small, safe world shattered. And then, on what seemed like a normal, quiet afternoon, when no one else was home, the only person Emma still trusted, her grandfather, did something that would change her life forever. But before we begin today's story, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the latest emotional journeys. Thank you. On cold winter evenings, the whole family would gather in the living room. The fire crackled in the fireplace. Emma would curl up in her mother's lap, listening intently as her grandfather spun his magical fairy tales. Sometimes, her father would chime in, correcting little details to add excitement. Her mother would laugh then, eyes lit with that simple, rare joy. In those golden moments, Emma believed her family would stay that way forever, untouched, unbroken. But real life is no fairy tale. The first changes came quietly, like a draft slipping under a door. No one noticed at first. Dad began staying out late. Long, whispered phone calls in the study. A quick hug replacing an evening together. Her mother often stood at the window, staring blankly at the driveway, unmoving, detached. Emma didn't understand why dinner grew quieter, why the warmth in the house began to fade. But she felt it, in the heaviness in the air, in how her parents stopped looking at each other, in the way her father's hand lingered just a second too long on the door handle as he left. Even Grandpa, once cheerful and animated, seemed to smile less. He still visited, still brought her peppermints, still told his stories. But his voice was slower now, more burdened, like the memories he carried were heavier than before. Emma tried holding on to what remained. The bike rides around the yard, baking cookies with her mom, the rare surprise hug from her dad. She thought maybe, just maybe, if she was good enough, if she smiled more, things would return to normal. But at night, if she listened closely, Emma could hear it. That delicate cracking sound. Like ice on a thawing lake. Quiet, barely there, but impossible to ignore. From the outside, Emma's family looked the same. But inside, fractures had begun to form, silent, colorless cracks that widened by the day. And Emma, with her small heart and a head too young to name the ache, would just hold her teddy bear tightly and wish with all her might that if she closed her eyes hard enough, everything would go back to the way it was. But Emma didn't know. Once cracks appear, they only grow. Quietly. Until one day, the entire world caves in. There was no screaming, no slamming doors, no tearful breakdowns, just subtle shifts. Like the way early winter creeps in under your coat without you realizing. She noticed it during dinner. Her dad stopped arriving on time. The table would still be set. Grilled meat, steamed vegetables, warm soup. But his chair remained empty. Mom would sigh, reheat his food without complaint, and pretend to cheerfully feed Emma. "Eat lots and save a bite for Dad," she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes. Emma didn't know why, but she found herself chewing slower. And then Marcus started visiting more often. At first, she didn't think anything of it. Uncle Marcus was fun, always turning dull afternoons into little adventures. He played checkers with Emma, flew kites, fixed creaky doors. Mom seemed happier when he was around. Emma would often catch her laughing at Marcus's jokes, her face lit in a way Emma hadn't seen in a long time. She remembers one day vividly. Marcus standing beside her mom at the sink, playfully dusting flour into her hair while they baked. Her mom shrieked, pretending to scold him, and tossed a towel in his face. They both laughed. Emma laughed too, thinking it was just one of those light-hearted family moments. But as the days passed, Emma began to see something different. Marcus's hand would rest on her mother's back just a little too long. Their eyes met in ways she had never seen before. Intense. Private. One night, while Emma read quietly in the living room, her mom and Marcus sat at the kitchen table, talking. Their voices were low, intimate, laced with soft laughter. Emma lifted her head. The warm yellow light spilled across their faces. They were sitting close. Too close. Her mother leaned in as Marcus whispered something into her ear. Her shoulders shook with laughter. And in that moment, something shifted inside Emma. A strange, cold tightness filled her chest. She placed her book down, clutching her teddy bear tighter than usual. She told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining things, that they were just close friends. But the seed of doubt had already taken root. Marcus began appearing more, dropping off pastries after school, helping in the garage, even joining grocery trips. He was as charming and cheerful as ever. But to Emma, something no longer felt right. One evening, she sat on the back porch, coloring. She heard her mom calling Marcus inside to help with a broken hallway light. Emma looked up. There they were, Marcus and her mother, standing close in the dim hallway. His hand briefly touched her back as he adjusted the fixture. Her mother smiled, softly, privately, the kind of smile Emma had never seen her give to Dad. That tiny gesture said everything. After that, Emma started noticing more. Marcus calling her mom Em instead of sister-in-law, her mother giggling at messages, then hiding her phone when Emma entered the room. Small things, sharp things, pieces that pierced Emma's young heart. She began pulling away, from Marcus, from her mother. Where she once proudly showed off her schoolwork, now she mumbled a few words and slipped off to her room. Even hugs felt foreign. The glances that used to comfort her now felt unfamiliar. One evening, the family gathered at the dinner table. Her father, tired from work, looked up and casually asked, "So, about your business trip next week?" Her mother flinched, startled, like she'd been yanked back from somewhere far away. "Oh, I'll arrange it," she said. And just like that, the silence spoke louder than any truth. Mom replied, her voice trembling slightly. Emma sat across from her, quietly observing. She saw Dad frown for a moment, then quickly relaxed, as if nothing had happened. The rest of the meal was silent. The sound of knives and forks hitting china plates sounded like cracks on glass. Emma looked at Mom, then at Dad. There seemed to be a vast distance between them that no one could fill. And Emma, just a child, was stuck in the middle, not knowing what to do, not knowing who to cling to, with only one clear feeling. Loneliness that night. Emma covered herself with the blanket, forcing herself not to cry, but the tears still flowed silently, soaking her pillow. Not because of being scolded, not because of bad grades, not because Toby tore her favorite book apart, but because Emma realized the people she loved the most, the people she had believed would last forever, were slipping away from her, and she stood there helplessly, unable to do anything but shrink back, hugging herself in the darkness that was getting thicker and thicker. Ever since the day Emma secretly saw her mother and Marcus being intimate in the kitchen, everything seemed to have changed. Emma became sensitive to every small gesture, every glance, every seemingly accidental touch between her mother and Marcus. Only when the truth flashed like thin thorns, Emma told herself, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe Mom and Uncle Marcus just like each other as friends. But those ambiguous moments kept repeating themselves, creeping into every corner of the small house like dust that could never be wiped away. One day, on a weekend afternoon, Marcus came over again. Dad texted to say he had to go on a business trip. Grandpa was busy visiting his uncle's house, only Mom. Emma and Marcus remained in the house. Emma sat in the corner of the living room, pretending to be absorbed in coloring. She tried to act like she didn't notice anything, but her eyes followed her every move. Mom was cutting fruit in the kitchen. Marcus stood against the sink, a glass of water in his hand. They were talking in hushed tones, broken pieces of laughter echoing in the distance. Then Marcus reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Mom's forehead. The gesture was light as a breeze, fleeting in less than a breath. But in Emma's eyes, it was as slow as a knife, cutting deep into the flesh. Mom didn't flinch. She even raised her head, smiling a smile Emma could never forget. Emma's palm clenched until it was numb. The coloring page in front of her was torn, without her knowing. In the evenings that followed, Emma often caught Mom texting while she was doing her homework. Mom smiled to herself, her fingers quickly moving across the screen of her phone. When Emma walked closer, Mom quickly locked the phone and put it in her pocket. "It's just a friend," Mom said. Avoiding her daughter's eyes, Emma was silent. She learned to swallow her questions slowly in the stories Emma created in her imagination. The little house was no longer the ivory vanilla-scented white. It was patchy and cracked, and the people inside were just shadows of strangers. Another afternoon after school. Emma came home earlier than usual because the club had been canceled. As she walked through the gate, she heard music coming from inside the house. A soft, old-fashioned love song. Not the kind her mother would play, sneaking through the front door. Emma saw Marcus and her mother carrying a new shelf into the living room. They laughed and joked, and her mother even patted Marcus on the shoulder. When he accidentally dropped a screw on the floor for a moment, Marcus put his arm around her to keep her from hitting the door. His grip tightened more than necessary for harmless support. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, speechless. Mother was the first to see her. Her eyes were frozen. Momentarily confused, then quickly regained their natural composure. "Hello, Princess. Back so early?" Mother called, her voice too hasty, too bright. Emma did not answer. She walked straight up to her room, her heart as heavy as stone that night. Emma covered herself with the blanket, her eyes wide open in the darkness. In her head, the images kept repeating, the eyes, the smile, the hand running through her hair. She did not know what she felt. She only knew that it was colder, lonelier, and more painful than any fever she had ever experienced. Dad seemed to sense something too, a few times. Emma saw him come home standing still, looking at the silent house, then quietly walking into the bedroom alone. But like Emma, Dad did not ask. No one dared to call out the truth that was quietly blooming in the invisible void day by day. Things were pushing Emma closer to the final limit. The fateful night when she would witness with her own eyes something that even the most fragile heart could not bear. It had been raining since the afternoon. Heavy gray clouds pressed down on the low roof, and the wind whistled through the leaves like distant whispers. Dinner that night was quieter than usual. Dad called to say that his flight had been delayed and he would have to spend the night in another city. Mom just hummed on the phone, unable to hide her tiredness. Emma ate slowly, glancing at Mom from time to time. Her face was covered in a layer of mist, both near and far. The electricity had been on and off since the afternoon, and by the time dinner was ready, the entire neighborhood was plunged into total darkness. Mom rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a few candles. The yellow light flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, making everything in the house seem to sway and whisper secrets. Emma retreated to the corner of the chair, hugging Toby, her heart filled with a vague unease. A moment later, the doorbell rang. 3 quick, familiar knocks. Mother glanced at Emma, nodded reassuringly, and stepped out to open the door. On the porch stood Marcus, wearing a sodden raincoat, holding a small flashlight. He smiled, his breath white as smoke in the cold air. "I heard the power's out. Come, see if you need anything," Marcus said, his voice as light as air. Mother smiled a smile. Emma had never seen her smile at anyone but her father, and hadn't for a long time. Emma watched silently as Marcus entered, carrying the scent of rain and cold. They lit more candles, placing them around the living room. The flickering light softened the edges, made everything seem hazy, as if the house was no longer the house. Emma knew Mother and Marcus sat side by side, closer than usual. They talked in whispers, occasionally giggling like children hiding a secret. Emma pretended to concentrate on the old book, but every word slipped away from her mind. Emma's senses were strained, listening, waiting without knowing what she was waiting for. Time passed slowly outside. The rain continued to beat steadily on the eaves, occasionally mixed with the distant rumble of thunder. Mother stood up, taking another candle from the kitchen. Marcus followed her, his hand lightly touching her back, a touch that seemed accidental, but felt so natural, so soft. Emma frowned. Her heart pounding. Toby in her arms also jumped, squirming uncomfortably after about 5 minutes. Emma couldn't take it anymore. She got up gingerly, pretending to go to the kitchen to get some water. The flickering candlelight guided the footsteps, as light as a breath from the dark hallway. Emma heard a faint whisper. Her mother's voice, then Marcus's. A choked laugh, a deep sigh. Emma held her breath, peering through the crack in the door, and in that moment her world collapsed in the flickering candlelight. Her mother stood in Marcus's arms. Her face was turned up, her eyes passionate, not the eyes of a wife for her husband's best friend. Marcus leaned down, and they kissed. There was no distance, no hiding. A real kiss, a kiss Emma hadn't seen her mother give her father in years. Emma stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest as if it would burst. She clutched the glass of water tightly in her hand until it slipped from her trembling fingers and fell to the floor with a dry clatter. Her mother and Marcus let go of each other in shock the moment their eyes met Emma's. The room froze. Her mother pulled her lips, moving incoherently. Marcus quickly retreated, his face full of panic. Emma didn't wait another second. She turned and ran up the stairs, her footsteps pounding loudly on the creaking wooden steps, leaving behind the flickering candlelight. Her words of explanation chasing after her, but not making a sound. Emma rushed into the room, slamming the door shut. She slid down her back against the cold door, her knees drawn up to her chest. Her little heart was pounding her head, spinning everything Emma had believed in her mother, her family. This safe home came crashing down before her eyes without warning. Tears welled up uncontrollably. She didn't cry out loud, just buried her face in her knees, her whole body shaking like an undercurrent outside the door. Her mother knocked softly, calling Emma in a trembling voice. "Emma, honey, I'm sorry. Open the door for me," but Emma didn't answer. She bit her lip, curling up as if she wanted to shrink into a grain of sand, disappear from this world. The night passed slowly. The candle finally went out, leaving a thick darkness that swallowed everything. Emma lay curled up on the bed, eyes dry. No dreams, no sleep. Only the memory of that moment playing over and over in her mind, like a slow-motion movie that never stopped. Her mother's smile, Marcus's hug, that kiss. Emma closed her eyes, wanting to erase it all, wanting to forget it. But the more she tried to forget, the more the image became engraved, sharper, cutting into her young heart, bit by bit. Near dawn, when the first pale rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, Emma was still lying there motionless. Toby rubbed his head against her chest, groaning softly, but even the cat could not soothe the pain swelling in Emma's chest. Somewhere in the house, the sound of her mother quietly cleaning the dishes, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing across the wooden floor. No one came to wake Emma. No one opened the door, no one asked. And Emma didn't want anyone to ask. She just wanted it all to disappear. The beautiful memories and the moments of last night to disappear from a world where love could betray so easily from that night. Something inside Emma died, innocence, absolute faith in family, the feeling of being loved unconditionally. She didn't know what life would be like. She didn't know if her mother could put the pieces back together. She didn't know if she could forgive. But one thing Emma knew for sure, everything was changed forever. Dad came back. The next morning, his suitcase dragging on the porch, soaked with last night's rain. Emma heard the door open from inside the room. She didn't go out. She just held Toby in her arms, her face buried in the soft fur, listening to each heavy footstep echoing in the quiet house. Breakfast that day passed in a heavy silence. Mom set the table as usual, fried eggs, toast, orange juice. But at the dining table, no one looked at each other. Dad whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't make it," and then focused on eating, not realizing that Mom's eyes met his like a passing shadow. Emma sat in the middle, feeling invisible. Every sound of the knife cutting into the egg, every fork tapping lightly on the porcelain plate, echoed coldly in the already cold atmosphere in the evening. Dad tried to pull Mom down on the sofa to watch a movie like the old days. Mother hesitated reluctantly, sitting down, keeping enough space between them to allow a third person to squeeze in. The comedy still emitted laughter from the screen, but in the living room, no one was laughing. Dad glanced at her occasionally, as if searching for something long lost. But Mom was focused on the screen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Emma sat on the stairs holding Toby, looking down through the gap in the railing. She saw it all the way. Mom leaned farther away when Dad moved closer. The way Dad sighed quietly, as if he didn't know what he dropped or how to pick it up. Sometimes for brief moments. Emma caught Dad sitting alone on the porch, his coffee cold in his hand, his eyes drifting far away, and Emma knew that even though Dad didn't know what had happened, deep down, he had a hunch the feeling was that the thread connecting father and mother had broken, leaving only two ends hanging, no longer able to touch each other. In the following days, life in the house continued mechanically. Mom went to work. Dad went on a business trip. Emma went to school. Everyone greeted each other in the morning, said good night in the evening, ate dinner at the same table. But each person seemed to live in their own world, separated by transparent, unbreakable walls. Only Grandpa, who still came by occasionally, his eyes sadder than before, realized that this house was gradually becoming a deserted house. Although it was still full of people, and Emma, amidst all that silence, stopped hoping for a miracle. She understood that sometimes there were things that once broken could never be mended. It was as if her childhood dream of a complete family was now reduced to small, sharp, cold fragments. Emma stopped crying. She just grew silently a little each day, in a silence that stretched like a winter that never ended. Emma's grandfather was the type of person who didn't easily express his emotions all his life. He believed that there were pains that didn't need to be expressed in words, and that if he stayed with someone long enough, they would know that they weren't alone. But this time he felt helpless. Since Emma's parents became cold to each other, her grandfather visited the house more often. At first he simply thought that he missed his granddaughter. But then every time he sat on the old armchair looking around the empty living room, he realized that something had changed, something that was as cold as the winter wind that seeped through the cracks of the door. Emma no longer skipped out to greet him like before. She greeted him smiling. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. Family meals were now awkward silences. Dad whispered a few questions about work. Mom answered in short sentences, and Emma bowed her head to finish her meal quickly. Grandpa felt like he was sitting among weary souls, each locked in an invisible cage one weekend afternoon. He arrived earlier than usual. Emma was sitting on the porch, her arms around Toby, her eyes silently following the clouds, drifting slowly across the sky. He sat down beside her, saying nothing, just silence, letting the space between them be filled with his gentle presence. After a long while, Emma turned to look at him, her tiny eyes filled with a sadness that no child should have to bear. Grandpa Emma's voice was hoarse. "Rowan, I sometimes feel so far away from everyone. When I'm in the house," Grandpa felt his throat tighten. He rubbed Emma's back gently, his hands rough but warm, because sometimes people are so hurt that they build walls. "My dear," he whispered, "it's not that they don't love you. It's that they don't know how to love you properly." Emma nodded softly, then turned away, continuing to stare at the clouds that evening. As he drove home, his grandfather couldn't stop the thoughts from rolling through his head. He remembered the times he saw his son Mark sitting blankly on the steps, his eyes vacant. He remembered the times he caught his daughter-in-law Emma's mother wiping away tears in the kitchen when he thought no one was looking. He knew that there were things that had been broken that could never be mended. But Emma was too young to understand and too innocent to bear all that loss alone. And then a quiet thought came to his mind. He would take Emma somewhere, a place without averted eyes, without heavy silences, a place with sun, wind, and the gentle sound of waves, soothing silent wounds. The sea, the very next morning he arrived early, carrying a small backpack and the warmest smile. "Your mother has an urgent matter to attend to with your father," he said, winking at Emma. "Do you want to go for a walk on the beach with me?" Emma hesitated for a moment, but when she saw her grandfather's eyes full of patience and love, not hasty, not imposing, she simply nodded, just to get away from this place for a moment, just to breathe. And so the two of them left the silent house, rushing into the bright light of the new morning, where the sun hung high in the sky. Like a promise of healing, Grandpa drove the old pickup truck. The windows wide open, the salty sea breeze blowing through Emma's hair. They didn't say much, not necessary. The distant sound of waves, the soft rolling of tires on the road. Those sounds were enough to mend the broken pieces in Emma's heart and in her grandfather's heart. There was also a silent prayer. May the sea help his granddaughter learn to trust again. May Emma not grow up with the scars left by adults. Grandpa's old pickup truck started with a low rumble, as if it was excited about this unexpected trip itself. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her small backpack clutched to her chest. She didn't ask where he was taking her. No need to ask. Grandpa's sparkling eyes, his gentle smile in the early morning sunlight, all were enough for Emma to know that this time she was going to a different place. A place without the heavy silence that was suffocating that house. The road leading to the sea was long and winding, covered with a carpet of pale yellow sunlight, like honey. The sea breeze blew through the wide open window, carrying a salty smell. The smell of freedom. The smell of things that had yet to be named, but made Emma's chest feel light. Grandpa drove, whistling an old tune softly. One hand was loosely on the steering wheel. The other was tapping the rhythm of the flute. Emma closed her eyes, letting the wind blow through her hair, letting the distant sound of the waves whisper comfortingly. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel overwhelmed by emptiness. About an hour later, the car turned onto a red dirt road strewn with rocks. Before them, the sea opened up unexpectedly, blue vast lapping at the endless white sand. Emma stared. She had never seen the sea like this before. Not in pictures, not in stories, but with her own eyes, her nose, her heart. The wind blew into her face, carrying a salty taste, making Emma squint and smile. She opened the car door and ran barefoot down the sand, leaving tiny footprints among the waves. Grandpa stood beside the car, arms folded, watching a gentle smile on his lips. Emma ran, giggling, letting the wind blow her hair. She picked up a shell, kicked her feet against the edge of the wave, and shouted her name out loud to the vast ocean. The sound soared up, mixed with the sound of the waves, and dissipated in the sunlight. Grandpa leisurely approached, playing with the old paper kite he had kept in the trunk of the car. Without her knowing, the two of them struggled with the mischievous wind, then burst out laughing when the kite finally took flight, fluttering and gliding in the deep blue sky. When she was exhausted, Emma lay down on the sand, eyes half closed, watching the clouds drift by. Grandpa sat next to her, pointing to the sky, telling her about the constellations that only appeared at night, about the trips to sea when he was young. Emma listened, but didn't really need to understand everything. Just know that here next to her grandfather under this vast sky, the little girl still has a place to breathe, to smile, to forget the sadness that has not yet been named a place. Where love is not something that is easily broken. The morning sea was like a giant silver carpet, and Emma and Grandpa walked leisurely along the sand, leaving deep footprints which were washed away by the waves. Let's build a sandcastle, Grandpa suggested, his eyes sparkling like a child's. Emma nodded, her eyes shining for the first time in weeks of gloom. They chose a high spot near the water's edge. Grandpa dug a wide moat around it, and Emma piled up piles of sand into towers. Emma's tiny hands gripped the wet sand, kneading it, forming uneven but sturdy walls. Grandpa decorated the walls with seashells and stuck dried coral branches like small flags. On the top of the tower, they both laughed. When a huge wave suddenly came crashing down, destroying half the castle, Emma shouted, "Run!" and dragged Grandpa away from the rushing water, leaving the small castle crumbling behind them like a fading dream as the sun rose. Grandpa invited Emma to play treasure hunting. He drew a simple map in the sand, and X at the end of the winding path. The treasure was a sparkling blue stone that he hid under a coconut tree. Emma happily held the map, her eyes shining, and ran along the faint traces, laughing as she ran. When she found the stone, she cried out as if she had found the whole world. "Grandpa, I found it. Good job." "Captain." "Emma," Grandpa laughed loudly, lifting the little girl up and spinning her around. At noon, they sat under the shade of an old coconut tree, eating cold sandwiches that were the most delicious in the world. "Say no." Emma, the sea breeze blew cool, the sound of the waves whispering incessantly like a lullaby. Emma chewed her sandwich, her feet swaying on the sand, occasionally turning to look at her grandfather as if to make sure he was still there, steady as a lighthouse in the middle of the ocean. No one mentioned home. No one mentioned their parents. There was only laughter, random stories, and moments passing as smoothly as cool water. In the afternoon, her grandfather played a game of paper boating. From old pieces of paper, he folded small boats, writing a wish on each boat in pencil. "I wish Emma would always be happy. I wish my wounds would heal. I wish the sea would always be generous." They floated the boats down the small stream that flowed to the sea. Emma watched the boats, her eyes sparkling, thinking to herself, "No matter how complicated the adult world is, there are still wonderful, simple things like this." The sunset began to fall, dyeing the sand golden, the sea surface shimmering like a giant mirror. Grandpa and Emma lay on the sand, watching the sun gradually set below the horizon, their hearts light. "Grandpa," Emma called softly, "what's wrong, honey? Will you always be here?" Her voice was tiny, trembling. Grandpa turned, his eyes shining with the last rays of sunlight. He stroked Emma's head slowly, saying, "As long as you need me, I will always be here." Emma smiled, a sincere smile, small but warm like a fire kindling in the middle of a long, cold winter night. She knew that life could change, adults could make mistakes. But here on this beach beside her grandfather, she still had someone to trust, someone to rely on, and that was enough. The sunset passed in the blink of an eye. The sea gradually receded, leaving the shimmering sand reflecting the red sky. The wind blew cool, carrying the salty smell and the sweetness of freedom. Emma and Grandpa sat side by side, shoulder to shoulder on the small stone steps leading down to the water. The little girl hugged her knees tightly to her chest, her eyes following the waves as they rushed to the shore, and then retreated as if playing an endless game that only they understood. Grandpa was silent for a long time. He understood that there were things that could not be rushed. There were sorrows that needed to be addressed by their owners. After a while, Emma spoke first. "Grandpa, why do adults hurt each other?" Her voice was as small as the wind blowing across the sea. Grandpa looked straight at the horizon, his voice quiet, because adults are just children who have been hurt. Emma frowned, not quite understanding. He turned, smiling, his eyes glowing with the color of dusk. "When we're kids, we all dream of growing up to be good, of loving and being loved, but then life. It's not as easy as we think people are. Busy, people are tired, people are scared, and sometimes because we're so afraid of losing, we do stupid things, hurt ourselves, and hurt the people we love." Emma pondered, her hands lightly, rubbing the sand at her feet. "Mom, do you still love Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. Grandfather sighed. "I can't answer for your mother," he said softly. "But I know there are feelings that, even if they're not as complete as they were at first, are still true at some point." Emma bit her lip, her eyes red. Then, why did Mom? The question hung in the air, unfinished. Grandfather placed a warm hand on Emma's shoulder, rubbing it gently. "Because your mother was lonely, lost, searching for something she thought she had lost," he whispered. "No one is perfect, Emma. Not even the people you love most." The sea roared softly like a sleepy beast. Emma was silent, her heart in turmoil. Most of her was still angry with her mother. She still couldn't forget that fateful night, the kiss by candlelight, the silent, cruel betrayal. But there was also a part of Emma, a part that grew stronger by the hour, that understood that hatred couldn't make the pain go away. Only forgiveness could truly free the heart. Emma bowed her head and whispered, "But I feel so sad, Grandfather." Grandfather squeezed her shoulder. "Be sad, my dear," he said. "Don't try too hard. Don't force yourself to forgive right away. Take your time, cry when you're hurt, when your heart is ready. It will let go." The brilliant sunset gradually faded, giving way to dark purple streaks. The two of them sat there like two small rocks, steadfast against the wind. And waves, no need for empty words of comfort, no need for empty promises. Just having each other, just knowing that no matter how chaotic the world is, there is still a strong shoulder to lean on. When you're tired after a long while, Grandpa spoke, his voice as deep as the sound of distant waves. "You know, when I was young, I also heard someone who loved me very much." Emma turned her eyes wide with surprise. He smiled gently, looking out to sea back then. "I was fun-loving and free. Your grandmother, a gentle, patient person, endured many months of me being absorbed in my friends and work, forgetting that a family also needed nurturing." Emma listened attentively, holding her breath, until one day she packed her bags, took your then tiny father with her, and went back to her mother's house, he said, his voice low. "That was the first time in my life I knew what it was like to be afraid of losing something precious." The wind blew gently, soothing the soft sand beneath their feet. Grandfather continued, his eyes shining with a distant sadness. "It took me years to make amends, not with empty apologies, but with real change from within." He placed his hand on Emma's head, gently stroking her hair. "Forgiveness, Emma, is not forgetting the pain. Forgiveness is accepting that everyone can stumble, and if you hold on to anger, you will only lock yourself in pain." Emma looked up at him, her clear eyes reflecting thoughtfulness. "But if you forgive, can you ever go back to the way you were?" she asked softly. He shook his head, a sad smile appearing at the corner of his lips. "No, my dear. Some things once broken can never be whole again. But that doesn't mean they can't become something else, a lesson, a strength, a growth." Emma was silent for a long time. The sound of the waves still laughed patiently in her ears, as if reminding her that even when everything changed, the ocean was still there. Vast, patient, never demanding, Grandpa looked at Emma. His eyes warm like a small fire in the night. "You will be sad. You will be angry. You will want to forget everything. And that's okay," he said. "But please, no matter what happens, don't let sadness make you forget how to love your heart. Emma is beautiful. Don't let it become barren, just because of the mistakes of adults." Emma bit her lip, feeling something catch in her throat, a feeling of pain. Relief and release. They sat there for a long time, until the ocean was a strip of black velvet sparkling with stars. Grandpa took a small glass jar from his backpack filled with colorful seashells. "Here," he said, handing it to Emma, "are the broken pieces of the ocean. But you see, even though they're broken, they still sparkle beautifully, just like your heart. Even though it's broken, can still sparkle. If you choose to love again." Emma took the jar, holding it close to her chest as if it were a treasure. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe deeply, deeply without her chest aching, as her grandfather draped a warm coat over her shoulders, and they slowly walked back toward the camp. Emma turned to look back at the sea. Once more, the waves were still crashing on the shore. The wind was still blowing. And though her heart was still in turmoil, Emma knew from today on she would learn to forgive. Not because others deserved it, but because she herself needed peace. It was dark. The deep sky was woven with stars sparkling like thousands of tiny gems, suspended in black velvet on the deserted beach. Grandpa lit a small fire. The flickering flames danced, illuminating his kind features and Emma's tousled hair. The seas blew, carrying the scent of fragrant smoke and the patient murmur of the waves in the distance. Emma sat huddled in her thick coat, holding a jar of sparkling seashells. She watched the sparks fly up, twisting in the sky and disappearing. Feeling something in her heart melt away, no longer stiff, no longer heavy. Grandpa placed a new stick on the fire, then sat down beside her. "When I was your age," he began, his voice low and warm, "I dreamed of being a sailor traveling the world, searching for great treasures." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, listening. But then I realized he smiled, his eyes distant. "The greatest treasures are the people I love. The afternoons sitting by the fire, the laughter, the memories. Like this." Emma closed her eyes, letting the wind caress her cheeks, letting the crackling fire penetrate every fiber of her heart. She thought of her mother, of her father, of the days when she was a child, when everything seemed simple. Love was forever. Family was unchanging. Now she understood love also needed to be nurtured, and adults, no matter how hard they tried, sometimes lost each other along the way. But that didn't mean the love that once existed between them was fake. Grandpa told Emma more little stories about the first time he went fishing and failed miserably, about the time he lost his wedding ring and found it in his old shoes, about how failure and loss didn't destroy him, but instead made him more patient, more gentle. "People aren't strong because they never fall," he said, fire dancing in his eyes, "but because every time they fall, they learn to get up and keep going." Emma smiled a small, hopeful smile when the fire was reduced to smoldering ashes. Grandpa wrapped his arms around Emma. "Remember, my dear," he whispered, "even if the wind blows out the fire, the ashes will still hold warmth and love. If it's true enough, we'll never die, if you just believe." Emma pressed her cheek against his shoulder, closed her eyes, and let the sound of the waves and his heartbeat lull her into a peaceful sleep for the first time in a long time. Emma had beautiful dreams, dreams of blue seas, cool breezes, laughter echoing under the starry sky, and of a warm old hand always holding hers, guiding her through the uncertain days ahead the next morning. Emma opened her eyes as the early morning sun poured into the small room. The smell of sand, the wind, the ashes from the campfire the night before lingered around her like an invisible blanket, warm and comfortable. Emma sat up, rubbing her eyes. A strange feeling crept into her heart, no longer heavy, no longer constricting like the days before. She knew she had changed just a little, but enough to start the ride back to the city was silent. Grandfather occasionally glanced at Emma, his eyes filled with secret pride. Emma sat in the seat next to her, holding the jar of seashells in her arms, watching the fields recede, the small roof soaring past the window. She thought of her father, of her mother, of the laughter that had disappeared, of the times of anger, disappointment, heartache. And then Emma thought of her grandfather, the man who had taught her that a broken heart could still sparkle. Emma squeezed the jar of shells. Not because her mother deserved forgiveness, not because what had happened no longer hurt, but because Emma wanted to be free to breathe, to live without a heavy iron ball in her heart. As the car turned onto the familiar street, Emma saw the small house under the oak trees. It was still the same white walls, old wooden fence swinging in the wind. But Emma knew deep down everything was different. Her mother was standing on the porch, her arms wrapped around her elbows, her eyes uncertain. Her father stood behind her, silent, his eyes tired and distant, Emma stepped out of the car, her heart pounding for a brief moment. She felt like turning and running back to the sea, back to the laughter, back to freedom. But then Emma took a deep breath. She remembered her grandfather's words. "No one is perfect, but you have a choice to carry your anger or to carry your love." Emma walked slowly toward her mother. Mother looked at her, her eyes red, her face streaked with remorse. Regret that she could not hide. Mother opened her mouth to say something, but Emma spoke first, her voice soft but firm. "I'm home, no blame, no resentment, just acceptance, a new beginning." Mother burst into tears, knelt down and hugged Emma, shaking like a lost child who had just found her home. Dad moved closer, put his hand on Mom's shoulder, and for the first time in months, the family still fractured. As they were stood together, touching that evening, Emma sat by her window. The jar of seashells by her bed, the night wind blew in, carrying the scent of oak leaves and the soft sway of the swing. Emma knew it wouldn't be easy. It would take Mom a long time to fix what was broken, Dad too, and Emma herself would have painful days, sudden tantrums. But like the seashells in the jar, each tiny piece in the soft light could still sparkle. Emma smiled softly, wrapped her arms around her knees and closed her eyes in her sleep. She dreamed that she was standing on a vast beach where the waves and the wind sang forever. A song of courage, of forgiveness, and of hearts that could heal themselves in the days after. Emma returned, a different silence gradually spread in the small house. No longer a heavy, cold silence, but the silence of people trying to mend what was broken. However clumsy and slow, Mother changed. No more noise, no more showiness. She got up earlier, prepared a full breakfast for the whole family. No more rushed meals, no more secret furtive phone calls every time. Emma went to the kitchen. Her mother was always there, busy cooking or cleaning. But her mother's eyes were always raised, searching for Emma like a door always open, just waiting for her to enter. Emma felt those efforts. She also felt the fear in her mother's eyes. The fear of losing something most important. But Emma wasn't ready, not because she wanted to punish her mother, but because her young heart needed time to heal itself. Mother seemed to understand that she did not push, did not demand, she just quietly waited patiently, like someone standing in the rain, waiting for a door to open on the other side. There were nights when Emma woke up in the middle of the night, thirsty. When she quietly went out, she caught sight of her mother, sitting absent-mindedly on the porch, the small light shining on her tired face and her eyes heavy with worry. Mother did not cry. She just sat there motionless, like a shadow. Emma quietly went back into the room, hugged Toby. Her heart sank. She knew that although no one said it, everyone in that house was silently trying in their own clumsy way one Sunday afternoon when it was drizzling. Emma was painting by the window when her mother tiptoed in holding a warm cookie in her hand. "Are you hungry?" her mother asked, her voice soft, as if afraid to break the fragile silence between them. Emma hesitated a moment, then nodded. Her mother put the cookie down on the table, saying nothing more. She stood there for a moment, hesitating, as if she wanted to say many things. But in the end, she just gently stroked Emma's head, then turned away. Her mother's hand briefly touched Emma's hair, gently trembling like a wordless apology. Gradually, Emma learned to respond slowly, little by little, a nod, instead of a cold refusal. A quick squeeze of the hand when crossing the street at time. She rested her head on her mother's shoulder in the cinema. Those small gestures gathered together, weaved into a fragile thread connecting two hearts that had been torn apart. No one mentioned the past. No one forced anyone to forgive completely or to forget what had happened. Just little by little each day, they learned to exist together, more sincerely and patiently late one night. When passing Emma's room, her mother stopped for a long time in front of the half-closed door. She raised her hand about to knock, then stopped. Just stood there silently, her eyes filled with things that could not be expressed in words. Emma saw her mother's shadow through the crack in the door. She put down her drawing pen, silently watching. and for the first time not out of pity nor out of pressure. Emma got out of bed herself, opened the door wide. No need to say anything. Just a tight hug, just a small arm around her mother, enough to make her cry, enough for Emma to know that sometimes forgiveness doesn't need flowery words, just enough love to dare to open her heart again. The days that followed passed slowly, like a stream winding through a meadow. Emma returned to school. Mother continued to work at the small library down the street. Father began to come home earlier, sometimes playing with Emma, the old jigsaw puzzle they had played when she was little. Nothing was the same, and Emma knew that some things would never be the same again. But that was okay. Mother and Father no longer held hands like they used to. But every night they cleaned the kitchen together, asked Emma about her schoolwork, and sometimes exchanged silent glances. Like two friends sharing an old memory, Emma no longer avoided her mother. She still had sad days when she suddenly remembered that fateful kiss that night and felt a dull ache. But every time she did, Emma thought of the sea, of the sound of the waves that never tired to Grandpa's warm hands, to the paper boats filled with wishes floating out to sea. Grandpa still came by every Saturday afternoon. The two of them sat on the porch, drinking hot cocoa, telling each other endless stories. The adult world, Grandpa laughed, sipping his cocoa is as confusing as you can see. But no matter what, you can always choose how you face it. Emma smiled, the late afternoon sunlight glinting on her soft hair. She knew she was no longer the innocent child she used to be. But she was not a child who had lost faith. Emma had learned to hold on to her own light. A gentle, enduring light that would not be easily extinguished by storms. One day, Emma asked her mother to take her to the sea again. They walked together, not saying much. The car swayed over the red dirt roads. The blue sky seemed to stretch to the horizon. When they arrived, Emma took off her shoes and ran barefoot on the sand, the familiar cool feeling spreading to her toes. Mom stood in the distance, watching, no calling, no stopping, just smiling silently, letting Emma be herself. Emma ran to the water's edge, the waves gently lapped at her feet. Cool. She closed her eyes, spreading her arms as if to embrace the vast ocean. In the salty breeze, Emma whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you, sea." She knew that no matter how old she grew up, no matter how many failures she had to go through, she could still return to this place, where the waves never stopped beating, where the wind never stopped blowing, where the memory of an old but steady hand was always present. Before leaving, Emma picked up a small seashell and put it in her pocket. No need for much, just a piece of memory to remind her that she had been hurt, had forgiven, and had been strong enough to move on. When she turned around, she saw her mother standing there, waving her hand gently. Emma smiled, not the innocent smile of her childhood, but a more mature, gentle smile, the smile of a heart that had been broken, but still chose to love the sea, was still there. Still caressing the soft sand like it had always been. Still singing the song of tolerance, of patience, of little hearts that never stopped searching for light despite the storms. And Emma knew that throughout her life, whenever she lost her way, she only needed to close her eyes, remember the sound of the waves, and she would find her way again. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Emma's story. The story is not simple, not noisy, but contains vibrations that perhaps each of us has touched even just once. If you have ever been hurt, been angry, learn to forgive. Hopefully, this story has been with you. Like a small, gentle, and quiet friend, what do you feel most after listening to the story? I look forward to hearing your feelings. See you in the next story.